Hi, everyone. We're just waiting for people to stream into the webinar. My name is Wendy Osborne. I'm a senior consultant with IAVE, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this second webinar in our series of youth volunteering and social change. And the topic of today's webinar is youth volunteering and well-being, exploring how volunteering can make a difference. IAVE has a real focus this year on youth volunteering, and we have created a number of challenge papers on various issues. And the webinars that we are part of highlighting those issues and allowing us to engage with global panels in terms of what matters most, how we can do things better, how we can focus more on youth volunteering and make it more impactful for young people and indeed for the communities in which they serve. So we're delighted to welcome you all, and particularly I am delighted to welcome our panelists today. They will be introduced by our moderator, Dr. Chris Malora, but I'm always very grateful to those people who agree and decide to join us as panelists, because their experience and expertise is very important to us. Dr. Chris Malora has been our moderator and has been the author of our challenge papers, and he has been involved in the first two webinars and indeed will stay with us for the second two. He's originally from the Philippines and is a senior research associate and Leverhulme Trust Early Career Fellow at the School of Education and Lifelong Learning, the University of East Anglia. And Chris's knowledge of volunteering and indeed his knowledge of the subject matter that we're discussing today is very important. And I would encourage everyone, if you have not read the challenge paper associated with this webinar, please do, because it provides an insight into the issue of youth volunteering and well-being that is a really important topic for 2023. So I'll hand over to Chris now and ask him to lead us through the session. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Wendy, and good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, wherever you're joining us from. It's nice to see such a wide range of audience and participants coming from different parts of the world, as you can see in the chat box. So we're welcome and we're very happy to have you here and discuss with you and engage with you on such an important topic. So maybe just to let you know a little bit about the format for today, I'm going to introduce to you very shortly the panelists. And then after that, we're going to talk a little bit about the challenge paper that Wendy has just discussed. So the challenge paper contains some of the issues and challenges around this topic of youth volunteering and youth well-being, a very important issue. And I think a lot of, many people are working towards this issue in many parts of the world. And then we're going to have a Q&A. It's going to be a generous Q&A and discussion. It's going to be around, I think, 40 minutes or so, where we have our panel discuss the topic. And of course, we encourage everyone to please ask questions and write down your questions on the Q&A. There is a Q&A box, I think, that you can find at the bottom of your screen. You can put your Q&A and questions there, and we will take them up as we go along. Okay, so now I'm going to introduce to you our fantastic panel. I'm going to start with Mary Melambo. Mary, are you around? Maybe we can spotlight Mary so everybody sees her. And if I'm not sure if her camera is on, but Mary, hi Mary, lovely to see you. Last time I met Mary was in not South Africa, but in Abu Dhabi. So Mary, we're very happy that you're here. Mary Melambo is the founder and executive director of Lungelo Youth Development, which is an organization based in KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. And the organization has a vision of creating a resource center for children's development and a platform to addressing societal issues affecting the youth by building capabilities and exploring opportunities. So hi, Mary, nice to see you, and we will hear from you later. So that's Mary. We also have, as part of the panel, we have George Fielding. George is the Policy and Public Affairs Officer. Hi, George. Of Volunteering Matters, which is a UK-based charitable organization that brings people together to overcome some of society's most complex issues through the power of volunteering. George's background is in the mentoring and advocacy of young wheelchair users. And secondly, volunteer management within social care settings. So we have a young person with us today, which is great. Nice to see you, George, and we'll hear from you later. And then we have Rahim Hassanali. So Rahim is the Global Volunteering for Development Leadership Manager at VSO, or Volunteer Service Overseas. He has a background in youth development, working in different NGOs, such as the Aga Khan Development Network and the Princess Trust here in the UK. Most recently, Rahim has done an excellent work in leading the development of the world's first global volunteering standard on behalf of VSO and the International Forum for Volunteering and Development. And maybe we hear a little bit about that later when Rahim joins us in the panel. Thanks, Rahim. And finally, joining us all the way from Hong Kong is Mike Chung. Good evening, Mike. He is the Deputy Director of the Youth and Aged Association in Hong Kong. He is a dedicated advocate, young person for volunteerism, and has been actively involved in promoting and supporting volunteer efforts in Hong Kong. He has a background in community development and has worked with a variety of organizations to develop and implement volunteer programs to make a positive impact on communities. So once again, thank you, Mike, for joining us, and we'll hear more from you later. Okay, so what I think I'll do at this stage is to just give you a taste of some of the issues that we've talked about in the challenge paper. So as you know, the topic for today's webinar is youth volunteering and youth well-being, exploring how volunteering can make a difference. And this webinar grew from a challenge paper. We call it a challenge paper because basically it maps out some of the issues and challenges, both in academic literature, but also in some of the more practice-based and organizational reports on the issues of youth volunteering and how it relates to well-being. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that challenge paper, hopefully to frame our discussion today. So can you move on to the next slide, Gal, please? All the way to the presentation. Before I start, I'd like to recognize a young person from the Philippines. His name is Zairil de Los Angeles. And Zairil was a research assistant of mine for this project. And it was really interesting to work with a young person to develop this paper because you get really a perspective from him and also from his own work. So Zairil, unfortunately, I'm not sure if Zairil was able to make it today. I cannot see him in the participants list, but Zairil is an active youth leader in the Philippines and have been working towards a lot of initiatives, not only on youth well-being, but also youth participation in local governance. So it was such a joy to develop a paper on youth volunteering and well-being with a young person or a youth leader like Zairil. So I just like to recognize his work for this paper. Okay, so I'm going to share with you now some of the key insights from the challenge paper. Can we move on to the next slide, please? And one thing that I'd like to emphasize is that for this paper, we really have a wider, that's great, Gal, that's perfect. We have a wider view of, or a broader understanding of well-being. And we do not only see well-being as it is most commonly understood as mental health. Mental health, of course, is an important part of well-being, but it is not the sole sort of aspect of well-being. So we really want to look at well-being in a much wider sense, a wide-ranging term, as what you can see in the slide, to describe a broader notion of physical, mental, social, material, and civic health. So it is much wider than mental health. In the paper, we also say that well-being is not seen as synonymous to health or happiness. It is much broader than just health and happiness. Well-being is also seen as beyond an individual responsibility or concern. In the paper, we talk a little bit about how context plays an important role in ensuring young people's well-being, right? So levels of poverty, family structures, cultural practices, government support, community dynamics, all of these external aspects and issues all play a role in an individual's well-being, in a young person's well-being. So in the paper, we talked about three ways by which by which well-being is understood. So well-being is such a complex concept, and it is understood differently in different contexts, in different studies, in different fields. But we've seen, so there's many ways to look at it, but we've seen three. We've reviewed three in the paper. First, we talk about how well-being is understood in terms of risk. Now, what does that mean? Well-being is often understood by depending on risk and protective factors. So risk factors are those factors that increase the likelihood of negative impacts, while protective factors would then decrease the negative impact. So academic literature is telling us that the risk and protective factors occurs at various levels of young people's lives. So may that be individually, in the family, or in the community. So for instance, living in a community with high levels of violence could be seen as a risk factor to well-being, while having a good and supportive relationship with at least one adult, at least according to literature, could be a protective factor. So that's one way of understanding a well-being. It is about having certain risks factors and having protective factors. So a lot of the programs and policies around well-being then is about how do we increase young people's protective factors and how do we decrease the risk factors. So that's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at well-being is in terms of balance. So there are also academics and psychologists and also young youth-focused academics who talk about well-being as a balance, right? It is about having the psychological, social, and physical resources to meet a particular psychological, social, and physical challenge. So it's about having this balance, right? It's not a fixed state, but it is a balancing act, right? So what types of resources do I have so that I am able to face a particular challenge or a particular issue, may that be socially, psychologically, or physically? To be able to balance that is well-being, right? So then the question becomes, how do we provide young people with the right resources so they are able to face the challenges that they face in everyday life, right? And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. So that's risk, that's balance. And the third way of looking at it is what they've described as flourishing. So flourishing is not only about identifying the risks and identifying the protective factors, not only about the balance, but it talks about how well-being is actually about contributing to the flourishing of the society. So it's about how do you contribute as an individual so that the community would flourish. So under this school or this understanding of well-being, young people, life satisfaction, feeling good and being able to contribute all play a role, right? So well-being is about satisfaction with life. It is about personal development, but also it is about social well-being. And when they talk about social well-being, they talk about how it is not only about feeling good and functioning well, but well-being is also about doing good for others, right? So not about only feeling good or functioning well, but also doing good for others. So that's a wider view then of well-being. It's more of flourishing. So those are the three ways by which well-being is understood. And we'd like to emphasize that because this is such an important aspect of the paper, to have a wider view of what well-being means and what well-being looks like in different communities. Next slide, please. Now, but why is this important? Next slide, please, Gal. Thank you. So, the experience all over in the literature, in the academic literature and in the research studies, they always say the experience of adolescence is different across cultures and contexts. My youthhood in the Philippines is very different, perhaps from youthhood in the UK or in India or whichever country, right? However, generally, it is considered as a time of significant transitions in young people's journey into adulthood. So now we wanted to establish why is it important, particularly to look at well-being of young people. So, adolescence is a time where they create new connections, right? They make vital decisions and experience major life changes that make that result in important personal and social challenges that could impact their overall well-being. So it's a specific stage in life, as what literature says, that then challenges young people and provides them with, many challenges that they need to face that could impact their well-being. The data on youth well-being it's not encouraging. According to recent World Health Organization data, 1 to 7 young people aged 10 to 19 have untreated mental health issues. Anxiety and depression are top causes of illnesses, while suicide is the fourth leading cause of death among 15 to 29-year-olds, which is, the youth cohort. There's the COVID-19 pandemic, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that later, has impacted also overall well-being, not just mental health, but also young people's satisfaction in life, but also their future aspirations in terms of employment and education. It is also important to highlight that often the impact of well-being to young people fall along the lines of inequalities in gender, socioeconomic status, and geography. For instance, we found research in Trinidad and Tobago where girls were more likely to contemplate and attempt taking their lives as compared to boys. Transgender and gender diverse youth were also found to be more likely to experience, poorer mental health and well-being. During the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, the UN Women talked about the shadow pandemic, wherein there was an intensification of gender-based and domestic violence, which again impacted young girls in particular and women because of the pandemic. So it's important to understand that well-being is different and it impacts and often differently to different people, and it is often impacting the most marginalized in the society, young people in the society, much more. Another thing that we found is that during times of multiple crises, like the pandemic, for example, young people are often disproportionately affected. There was a youth-led participatory research in Southeast Asia and the Pacific that reviewed for the paper, and they found that young people expressed that they were significantly impacted by the grief resulting from the deaths of family and friends, as well as the uncertainty of the overall public health situation during the pandemic. So it's impacting them quite significantly. It changed their aspirations. Some of them in the countries where the research was conducted had to start their own businesses at a very young age and become heads of households because their family and their parents either passed away because of COVID, or they are not able to go to work because of the lockdown measures, etc. So these has affected their aspirations as individuals, and contribution to a flourishing society, as we said earlier. In the literature, they also now start to talk about the climate anxiety. As there was a survey of 10,000 children and youth in 10 countries, and the survey revealed that young people were so worried about climate change and how it is handled by the government. And it elicits emotions such as sadness, anxiety, anger, powerlessness, helplessness, and guilt. In this survey alone, close to half of the participants express that climate anxiety is not only here, in their minds, but it is really affecting their everyday lives, their activities, and their thoughts. So these crises are affecting young people in very specific ways. And despite all of that, despite all of the issues that young people are facing, we've seen that services on youth well-being have decreased in several communities around the world, right? So there was a report in the UK, for instance, that several young people who wanted to access mental health services were not able to do so during the pandemic or during the times that they needed it the most. So this is sort of the global issue or the global landscape that we're looking at. That's why it is important to look at this issue now. And it is important to understand this issue at this moment. And I'm sure that our panelists are able to tell us, right, what are some of the activities they're doing to combat some of these issues, and also their thoughts about how these issues are playing out in their lives or in their communities. So next slide, please. So as you can probably guess, right, the issue of youth mental health and well-being is massive. And just like any other social challenge, right, the response needs to be across initiatives and sectors, and that includes volunteering. So I think we also want to give a caveat, right? That when we think of volunteering as a pathway to enhance well-being among young people, this is not always one way. This is not always simple, and this is not always direct, right? So we do not want also to overplay the contribution of volunteering towards mental well-being or physical well-being or social well-being. It has a contribution, but there are other sectors as well that needs to work together with volunteers and with volunteer organizations. So just a little caveat that we're not seeing volunteering almost like as a silver bullet that will solve all the issues on well-being. That's basically not what we're trying to argue. So I'm going to now tell you some of the key insights from the paper. And let's start with this one. So the first key insight, next slide, please, is that young people have long addressed issues of well-being in their communities through volunteering. So against the backdrop that we talked about earlier of insufficient and inaccessible mental health and well-being services, many youth volunteering initiatives focus on providing mental health and well-being services and support, especially to those who are unable to access them. So it's interesting because young people are not only impacted by issues around well-being, but many of them are taking these matters into their own hands and doing something about well-being of their peers or of themselves, right? So many volunteering initiatives, for instance, focus on providing mental health and well-being services to support people who are not able to access, these types of services. One example that we've cited in the paper is this program in Zimbabwe called the Youth Friendship Bench, where there are student volunteers, often those studying sociology or psychology, for instance, are trained as well-being providers to serve as well-being buddies for their fellow youth. So they have this friendship bench. You have these young people being a peer sort of buddy to another young person to talk about mental health issues, physical health, and all other well-being issues. And this program has already served around 50,000 young people in 2021 in Zimbabwe alone. So there's also a program in Canada where young youth volunteers would organize community activities and education to facilitate better well-being among South Asian youth who have recently moved to Canada or recently migrated to Canada who might have experienced discrimination and racism. So we see here examples of young people taking the matters into their own hands and really doing something for their peers. But also, this is not just about service delivery, right? We've seen also examples of youth volunteers' commitment to well-being that extends beyond service delivery and into campaigning and awareness raising. So we have an example in South Africa, for instance, where students from the University of Cape Town launched a campaign to highlight youth-led well-being solutions within policy programs and initiatives. So what they're trying to do now is not only to provide services on mental health and well-being, but also make well-being an important and a priority issue in the many communities where they work. And I'm sure we have examples later from the panelists on how they are doing this as well. One thing that we'd also like to emphasize is that when young people address mental health and social and well-being issues in their communities, it does not only benefit the recipients, but also the young people themselves. Right? So well-being, we've found, is enhanced by feelings of belonging to communities, a positive attitude towards others, or a feeling that they are contributing to the society. So as we said earlier, well-being is also about flourishing. It's about being able to contribute and do good for others in the flourishing of your society. Okay, key insight number 2. Next slide, please. Okay, so another insight that we found is that youth volunteering challenges social isolation and improve social connectedness. We found that civic participation, such as volunteering among young people, makes them feel like they are part of a group, for example, right? They feel that they are accepted, as well as they have a sense of empowerment by having knowledge of and access to resources to reach their goals. So an example that we've talked about in the paper is the Aerial Adherence Club, which is a psychological, as you can see here in the photo, right? It's a psychological support group for children and adolescents living with HIV, operating in 7 African countries, which started in 2007. So we looked at the case study in Tanzania, for instance. So what the club is doing, or what it demonstrates, is how volunteering facilitates not only the dissemination of life-saving services and information about HIV/AIDS, but also builds on the solidarity among young people living with HIV. So what happens is that the peer, the individual who's also living with HIV, the young person living with HIV, is able to create this community with his fellow young people, to be able to generate this type of solidarity, or a shared response to the issues that they face. Now, through volunteering, what is happening here is that they are able to develop a sense of community without being shunned or rejected. There are many studies that, particularly among people living with HIV, that actually support this finding, that often participating in a movement or participating in volunteering is able to increase the social cohesion of these community members, right? Because often they are seen as marginalized, right? That they are at the margins of the society, but actually they are at the center for this particular programs. They're saying, well, we want to do something about the issues that we faced, and we do that in solidarity with others. So young people, the second point here, are able to develop peer-to-peer and intergenerational relationships that facilitate better feelings of belonging in a society. Key insight 3. There are only 4 insights, so we're getting there. Key insight 3 is about volunteering enhancing young people's sense of self, right? So another key insight that we found, it's not only about social well-being, right? But also how the individual, the young person, views themselves and what they can do or what they can contribute in a particular community. So youth volunteering or volunteering is also contributory to young people's identities, particularly increasing their self-esteem. I've seen this in my own research in the Philippines. You know, I work with young people with HIV in the Philippines for the past 5 years, and I follow their lives from when they were volunteers, and 5 years later, you know, they're now working, they now have very good positions in certain corporations, they have, you know, employment and also contributing to the organization. And you can really see the transformation about their own social positioning. Before they would say, well, we're only, you know, we're only young people, and then we have HIV, so we have a lot of challenges, you know, we can't participate. But then now they're saying, oh, I'm a certified youth community educator. I'm a certified volunteer. I am able to gather communities and young people and talk to them about HIV/AIDS and how to prevent HIV/AIDS and how to live a healthier and happier life. So that transformation of what they think they are able to do and what they think they are able to contribute to the society is an important aspect and an important sort of benefit of volunteering, if you like. So there have been research, right, in the UK that found that among, there were about 2,500 young people surveyed who said, this was volunteering in sports. They said that when they volunteered in sports, they had higher self-esteem and are less likely to worry and feel that their work is of importance. So they feel that their work is of importance. And close to 90% of those surveyed agreed that their life had more meaning because of volunteering and that they had a lot to be proud of because of the work that they do. So, you know, I think this is really sort of a fascinating finding that it's not just about their contribution to the society, but also how they view themselves in relation sort of to the social structures, that they are not just marginalized, but they can also do something, right? Reconfiguring their positions of the society. And finally, I just like to point you out to this study that we found in Sri Lanka on the third point, where they found that volunteering was considered by young people as part of their quote-unquote journey of growth. It broadened their personal perspective and their own realities, similar to the sense of flourishing that we discussed in the previous slide earlier. So in the research in Sri Lanka, among young people who volunteer, it was found that volunteering exposed these young people to new experiences, new tasks, new people, which inspired them, which inspired a personal reflection. One of them saying they reevaluated their long-standing beliefs and broaden their perspective, contributing to their personal growth. So it's also a change of perspectives and having sort of new realities through volunteering. Okay, next slide, please. But before that, I'd like to show you this photo of one of the young people I worked with, Angelo, this year. So I was just in the Philippines for 6 months to conduct research there with youth activists and youth leaders. And I worked with them for 6 months. And one of our activities was to talk about their everyday. I asked them to take photos of what they felt was a representation of activism and volunteering for them as youth volunteers. And this particular picture really struck me. It is a picture of a sign in the University of Angelo while he was just, in the school. And then this is what he wrote as a caption. So he said, "I stopped when I saw this sign in my university. It says, 'Watch your step.' For me, this means that we have to be vigilant and take care of ourselves and be aware. For me, activism is about being vigilant, but also about taking care of yourself and of others." So I think this is a very important aspect of youth volunteering and youth activism, for instance, that many of the young people I work with are also experiencing some of these mental health issues that they are trying, or well-being issues that they are trying to solve. Many of them also struggle with unemployment. Many of them also struggle with a very deficit view of their position in the society. Some of them are not even allowed to participate in certain spaces. Some of them are discriminated because of their gender and because of their social identity. So, and that is, I show that photo because it really rings through to the final insight that I'd like to share. That there, next slide, please, Cal, that there's also a potential for volunteering to counterintuitively place young people's well-being at risk. So there are evidence, for instance, when young people volunteer in high intensity and stressful environments, it can have unintended impacts and adverse effects towards their well-being. So a lot of young people, for instance, will be the first person to respond, like at least in the Philippines. I know there are a lot of Filipinos in the chat. In the Philippines, when there's a big typhoon that's happening, usually the very first person to help you are your neighbors, usually the young people, who are also in a way trying to process the natural disaster that has just happened, right? So these types, there are adverse impacts, for instance, on young people's well-being in extreme work environments, such as in disaster response or crisis intervention programs. We found research in Israel, for instance, wherein a study investigated the experiences of youth volunteers who responded to a number of emergency events, such as routine emergency calls, or they would respond to vehicular accidents and in mass casualty incidents. They were found to acquire, in a way, some post-traumatic stress symptoms and other issues brought about by exposure to such traumatic emergencies, right? So it's really important, right? So organizational resourcing, training, and peer support. This is one thing that we found. These are all important factors in mitigating the mental health and well-being impacts of negative impacts to young people's well-being when they volunteer in intense and demanding or difficult situation. And I'm sure Rahim's work on the global volunteering standards talks about the importance of duty of care and how organizations need also to make sure that young people's volunteering, that they are safe, right? That they feel fulfilled, not only safe, but also that their feelings and that their ideas are processed, right? Because some of these situations can have a negative impact on their well-being. Okay. Next slide, please. And just really to summarize, so we had 4 key insights, really. So the first thing that we talked about is young people have long addressed the issues of well-being in their communities through volunteering. So here we talked about how young people are at the front line of many of these initiatives, not only delivering services and mental health, well-being, better life outcomes, but also campaigning right, at the policy level, that these issues should be a priority in their governments and, of course, of the local organizations. So that's one. The second insight, we talked a little bit about how youth volunteering challenges social isolation and improves social connectedness. Even among marginalized groups, they're able to work together and respond to a shared issue through volunteering, which really enhances social cohesion in many groups. Number three, we talked about volunteering, how volunteering can enhance young people's sense of self, that it's not just about external all the time, it's also about internally. Young people are able to reconfigure their position in the society and say, well, I can actually do this. I can actually contribute to the flourishing of a society, as we talked about earlier. And finally, which is a caveat and is an important aspect, as I hope the panelists would agree with me, that volunteering could also counterintuitively place young people's well-being at risk, that there are situations where volunteering could do the other way, right? Instead of supporting young people's volunteering, it could even sort of, put it at risk. So we need to be careful as organizations and as advocates of volunteering and of young people to make sure that the experience is safe, the experience is fulfilling for them. So basically, it's about, and this is sort of the main challenge that we pose in the paper, that we should not only think about volunteering as enhancing well-being and that the connection is direct in one way. The question perhaps is, under which circumstances can volunteering enhance well-being among young people? Maybe the conversation should be about what sort of systems or processes should be in place so that volunteering can enhance well-being, particularly among young people. Maybe that's the question that we need to ask, instead of just assuming that it will lead to well-being, although there are evidence, of course, that happens. So I'm going to stop my presentation here. And so I haven't been looking at the chat, so I'm not sure if there are any questions there or anything, but
there are a few questions in the Q&A, Chris.
Right. I think we can address questions with the rest of the panel, if that's all right.
Wonderful.
So that it's just not me talking. So
absolutely
tired now with the presentation. But to ask George, Rahim, Mary, and Mike. Oh no, they're in the screen now. Okay, but we will spotlight them so that you could all see them. So we're going to have a panel discussion now. So I encourage everybody to put your questions on the Q&A, and Gal and Wendy will be helping me in fielding that to our fantastic panel. But I think I'll start with just really asking the panel for just their general sort of response to either the presentation or maybe to the challenge paper. So what are your sort of initial ideas and thoughts after reading the paper and listening to the presentation? Shall we start with Rahim? Shall we go over to you? If that's okay.
Yes, sure. That's no problem. Yeah, no, it's a very interesting paper, and we're finding the same for our work at VSO. We have a positive youth development framework, and we understand the importance of volunteering in tackling mental health issues faced by young people. It helps to enrich their social assets, capital, skills, agency, and contribution. We also, I really found the sort of the framework around risk and protective factors, balancing and flourishing. I thought it was really helpful to make us look at well-being in a more holistic way. And it's quite obvious from what we're finding from a VSO perspective, but also the work I'm doing in the UK, that a lot of the youth-focused well-being services are declining, or they're costly, or there's a massive variance in quality, and also access as well, especially when it comes to urgent access. So this is a huge issue, and I think it needs more investment from a lot of angles, including the work that we do. We know that youth-led solutions are we have it as youth-led solutions specifically. These interventions can be a lot more powerful and a lot more sustainable way to begin addressing challenges faced by youth. Also, like the work on, I really brought me back to the global volunteering standard. We recognize that if volunteering is not safe, supported, and structured correctly, it can be harmful. So, the standard actually helps us to bring about good practices from the end-to-end journey and how we design and deliver our projects to duty of care, how we manage our volunteers, and also how we measure our impact, keeping communities and youth at the heart of what we do. So I really resonated with that. And we did there's a specific area in duty of care which we added in, which was quite new. So, you know, normally we'd look at sort of safety, security, child protection, safeguarding, but we also added a unique component in that we felt was fundamentally equally as important as the rest, which was health and well-being. So big advocates for helping organizations look at sort of good practices through that sort of framework, which is a voluntary free framework, which I'll probably in my end notes, I'll let everyone know how to access that.
Thanks, Rahim. I think it would be really useful if you could share even the link of the standards to in the chat box so people can see. And maybe, so the volunteering standards, I think it's an important piece of work, right? So it sort of provides a framework for people to, when you organize volunteering programs, to make it safe, secure, etc. And can you tell us about where is it?
Just a very quick one. It's the world's first global volunteering standard, which actually pulls together good practices from across the sector. So we had several hundred practitioners from over 80 countries have reached a consensus on what good practice looks like in volunteering and development. We know loads of national frameworks exist, loads of organizational frameworks exist, but there's nothing really pulling this all together. So it's a free voluntary standard which people can download and read, and it's quite a personal tool as well. It's not a compliance-based standard. It's a standard that organizations can use to internally reflect to see where their strengths are, but also where there might be room for any improvements. And it covers the whole volunteering for development cycle, like I mentioned, from how we design and deliver our projects to how we measure impact. And we've also sort of launched with that a platform where anyone in the sector can for free join up and use like a self-assessment process, and also access a library of good practices and resources that are sort of submitted by people across the sector. So whether you're developing a new safeguarding policy, there'll be some sort of, you know, some submissions there where you can look at it, because we don't want people to start from scratch, because, you know, we acknowledge that there's so many good practices that exist. So bringing that together in one framework and having a library of resources shared by the sector for the sector is hopefully a helpful tool for organizations in our field to sort of advance their practices to be more responsible, more impactful, but also look at issues like this issue that we're discussing.
Like well-being, exactly. Thank you, Rahim, for that. Shall we now move over to Hong Kong then? Mike, what are some of your thoughts on
Thanks, Chris, for your great presentations. So I think when I was a youth, I would say, so like 10 years ago. So during that time, I would say there are lots of things I could participate in, especially on the volunteer work, because everybody is focusing on how we connect with the other people, how we contribute to the society. These are all the main item or the main focus that the school were teaching us, and we will talk to our peers. But nowadays, you know, there are lots of things that the youth can play with. For example, like Switch, for example, like the mobiles, so they take off, or for example, there are lots of things can distract their focus. They can do a lot of things. So on this part, there was when they think of what can I do with with my vacation time, they will think about I do a lot of things apart from volunteering. They will have a lot of things to do. So another things I would like to mention is about the employability. So Chris already mentioned a lot of things that, for example, like the pandemic situation in the past few years, and a lot of the current society's situation that which will cause the youth will have a lot of pressure from mental, to damage their mental, physical, or lots of things. So the youth cannot focus on the well-being. But all these things at the end, there one more factor will affect the well-being is about the employability. So they will think about what's the future job. They don't have a clear future roadmap on the career, especially after they graduate. There are lots of graduates nowadays in the society, and everyone is just most of people, I will say, they were having like generic bachelor degrees, so they don't know what they can do, because everyone is thinking like the world is changing. It's really fast. Just like I think all of you heard about OpenAI, so which is just announced like 3 months ago, and then among these 3 months, everything changed. So everyone is thinking about, so for example, like 1 year ago, we are still talking about how can we do in the volunteering through the virtual platform, like we're doing Zoom, a visiting or what. But now we are talking about how can we leverage the AI to do the volunteering, and the youth cannot really catch on all these things. The change is really really fast. So I would think all these things will cause a lot of pressure to all the youth, expect on their well-being and their life. Yeah.
So I mean that's a really interesting perspective around the role of the digital technology, also AI, in terms of, sort of how does that play out in the pressures that young people are experiencing and their aspirations as well, right? In terms of their future employment, etc. So it's a really, really important aspect, I think, that, to be honest, was not covered in the paper, but it should be. I think it should be a sort of an area that needs to be looked at. That's what these conversations are for, really, to sort of fill in those gaps as well. George, do you want to come in next and just really your general sort of comments and impressions on the paper, on the presentation?
Absolutely. First off, ladies and gentlemen, it's fantastic to be with you. It's a great paper and very much needed. My first reflections are that we have to always think about how we talk about volunteering. I'm not trying to take this back to basics, but in my view, there isn't a organization across the world that just does volunteering. Volunteering moves somewhere. Volunteering is a method by which you change your society, by which you demonstrate the truth of Ubuntu, the idea that I am because you are, and it is a method of demonstrating the power of relationships. Now, and actually the fact that the relationship that we have to the people around us and to our society is the thing that sustains us, that creates a newer, better society. So this is, as I say, a very timely paper, a great conversation, because there is nobody need. I 2 weeks ago was in a personal capacity, because I live a mile and a half from where the tragedy happened. I was with the families and the community that was affected by Grenfell, and I went to on the silent march to commemorate the 6th anniversary of Grenfell. Nobody needs to tell the community of Grenfell, least of all me, how to organize and how to speak its truth. So there is a whenever we are, and whenever you are in crisis, although I hope that nobody in this call is ever in that situation, the one thing you do not have is time. And so the beauty of volunteering is the doing. It is the action, it is the methodology of doing, and doing alongside yourself. The challenge that we all have as a global network of people that do the doing to create a better society is also that if we continue to fund the crisis, if we continue to do things as they are, all we will get is crisis. And what I believe and what I see from facilitating the I Will movement and other things in the United Kingdom is that young people have never had it harder. Anxiety, depression, falling out of the education system. So there is an acknowledgement that actually there needs to be a new way of teaching our young people. There needs to be a new way of engaging with our young people in a truly trauma-informed practice, and that is, and volunteers are everywhere doing this stuff. In the United Kingdom, we would not have our civic infrastructure, our pubs, our parks, our youth clubs, anything without volunteers.
Mm.
And so what is it that actually the people around us and the people that we have, what is it that they want their society to be?
Yeah.
And how can we create that and use this as a method to articulate that change?
Yeah.
And the last thing I will say on this is that if you are struggling, if you are in crisis, sometimes the greatest risk is to do nothing at all.
Mm.
And so yes, there's this balance here between supporting by being trauma informed, by listening relationally, but also realizing that something has to be done.
Mm.
Something has to be done in order to create progress and demonstrate we're listening to our communities that most need agency.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you, George. I think there's a lot of food for thought there, and I think you already addressed one of the questions in the Q&A here from Abigail, who's asking the view on volunteering as a means to an end. So that many people, not just the youth, use volunteering to regulate their mental health while not necessarily being involved in well-being initiatives. And I think what you said about, volunteering across different sectors, not only in mental health, actually has a very significant impact in young people's well-being and connectedness. And as you said, it brings sort of the UK community at least together. It, makes it work. Just makes the communities work. So that's a really important point. Thank you for that, George. I'll get back to you on some of your work as well later. But over now to Mary. Mary, any thoughts?
Greetings, everyone. And wow, what a presentation, Chris. Thank you. So, the gentlemen, all three of them quite touched on something that is very challenging. It makes you think. A lot of the times we talk about youth volunteering, but who is talking about youth volunteering? We have got initiatives that are not youth-led. We feed the youth what we want them, what we think this is what we want. And that's why a lot of the times you find that youth are not interested in these youth clubs or going to volunteer anyway, because they say, that's not for me, it's for you. So it's very important for us to involve the youth. And I liked it when Rahim said youth-led initiatives. In the country, like where I come from, but I also noticed when I read the whole challenge paper that mostly in the whole world, youth challenges are the same to some degree. When you talk about, the economy of the world is really just not great at the moment. And so when you say to young people, you're volunteering so you can get skills and, you get an opportunity that's a means for you to being employed. Employed by who? Where? Because there are no jobs out there. And then young people are going to volunteer until when? What is the timelines? You volunteer from now until when? And then what happens? So as much as we say to people, we appreciate that you're giving your time and you're giving your thoughts and your skills, there has to be some form of a structure to say, you volunteer up to this level and this is what you can do. And that can be done by the young people themselves, not by us. So let's make youth volunteering youth-led. I also want to touch on the stigma and discrimination. I know that we speak a lot about these youth clubs of young people that are HIV positive. Now, in my organization, for instance, we talk about young people that are on chronic medication, because already we stigmatize those that have got HIV. And then who wants to belong to a club where people know that when they see that group of young people, say, those are all the HIV positive ones. So we talk about those that are on chronic medication, and it could be any kind of chronic medication, because chronic is not just HIV. And a lot of these young people have got so much pressure and so much mental health issues related to the chronic medication. You can imagine you're 15, you're 16, you're 19, you're taking medication for the rest of your life. Whether you like it, whether you don't like it, whether you're in a good mood or you're not in a good mood, whatever the situation, you have to take this medication. That alone causes so much stress on young people. So we need to allow young people a space where They do not feel that there is stigma around. They do not feel that, they are labeled. Society has got a way of labeling young people. Say, for instance, you have a group of young people that come together, they've got activities to do, but because somebody saw one of them walking around with very short skirts, and we assume that they are sex workers. We don't understand the situation. We don't know where do they come from. It could have been a situation at home that forces them to go and ply their trade so that they can get some sort of income. But yet we are very quick to judge. So we don't go and understand why things are happening with young people. Instead, we want to structure them and say, okay, you go volunteer, you go sit in the office and photocopy papers. They don't want to do that. They want to go in the street corner and talk to a group of sex workers or people that use drugs and say, hey, why are you into this? How can we assist each other? How can we support each other? That is part of volunteering.
Yeah.
So society norms really lead to so much stigma and discrimination. Thank you, Chris.
That's a really good point, Mary. And I think what I found is that volunteering in some of the groups that I work with in the Philippines is that volunteering is a way for them to rewrite their position in the society, to challenge some of these norms, to say that, well, if I'm wearing a short skirt, or does that mean that I'm like this, I'm like that, I can do other things. So volunteering becomes a pathway for that. So that's really interesting. And I really like your point about youth-led solutions. So youth-led solutions, I think, are really important. And I think that brings me to a question to George, actually. George, one of the things that we found in the report is that many young people themselves have this sort of youth-led solutions towards young people's well-being. Can you tell us a bit more about your work in this area, and why do you think it's important to issues of well-being, to look at issues of well-being, particularly among young people? And if you could respond to that to just maybe a minute or 2 minutes. Sorry, we don't have. Go ahead, George.
So the volunteering is the most effective form of social care. It's non-clinical, non-judgmental. It is the only thing. I'm a wheelchair user. You can't see behind the screen, but I'm a wheelchair user. It's the only thing that I found, and that most people find with an additional need, you can do just by having a passion, having a purpose, turning up and trying your best. So I absolutely love the points of my predecessor here, because we have to be incredibly careful that we don't create an industry by deconstructing the terms that don't work, and just using words like youth-led and actually that we're creating systems and societies and activities that allow people to be who they are and show up as they are. And what we're seeing more and more is a distrust in the ability of young people to actually express themselves and make decisions about their own lives. And what we are doing when we do not do that, because systems and structures do not listen, what we're doing is actually losing all the creativity and the desire for leadership. Young people are not just the future of tomorrow, but they're the future. They're the leaders of today. And what the greatest risk we have as a society, by not allowing and creating spaces alongside young people in which they feel safe and supported, is that they do not want to take on the baton that we pass them. We want to pass on the baton. We don't want the baton to break halfway through the circuit. And the way that we do that is showing that we listen, that we care, and that we give them the space to be who they want to be, in a non-clinical, non-judgmental form. And volunteering, as I said, is, I think, one of the only interventions that truly allows people to do that with passion and purpose. Because we all have a reason for doing this work. And actually be selfish and be proud of what that reason is. and listen to what young people say their reason is for doing this work, and let that be.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much, George. And I really like your ideas around youth leadership. And I think Mary, you also talk about this, and I think Rahim as well, and Mike, that it's important for us to diversify the kinds of tasks and roles that volunteers have in our organizations, right? That they are not just going to photocopy stuff and give us coffee or whatever. They can be leaders and they can have their own initiative. So that's important. Mary, I'll go back to you now. And I want you to talk to us a little bit about your organization, the Lungelo, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, sorry, Lungelo Youth Development, which has been for many years, have been doing a great job in facilitating, this enhanced social well-being and participation among young people in South Africa. So based on your experience so far, and if you can give us examples, how can volunteering programs become more inclusive, particularly when engaging with young people who may be traditionally marginalized in their societies?
Okay, thank you, Chris. So part of traditionally marginalized people, I already touched on, for instance, people that we assume that are sex workers because of the way they dress. Also look at people that are living with some form of disability. It does not have to be a physical disability that somebody sees. Somebody could be hard of hearing. And when we have an engagement with a group of young people, we don't even bother to ask questions like, can everybody understand? Can everybody hear? Does anybody need a hearing aid or translation? Or we just go ahead and do it the way we want it. So it is always important to check, and that's what we try and do. I know that we don't do it to the best, but we always try and be inclusive. We always check in on the people that are there. Are you comfortable to talk? Are you okay? Are you, the language that we use? Are you hard of hearing? It's things like those. One of the things that we have mastered is, our youth center, we call it a safe space for young people. So we say, when you enter our premises, you're entering a stigma-free, safe environment. We have got a youth-friendly clinic on the premises because young people don't go to the health facilities. Teenage pregnancy is a big issue in our country. HIV/AIDS is a big deal in our country, and because young people refuse to go to the clinic, it's one small clinic in the village where everybody in the community goes to. So if they see me going to that side, then they know the aisle you're sitting in is for you to go get your contraceptives. So we say when a young person comes to our premises, whether they're bringing their school bag, coming to study, or it's somebody that coming to learn some skills, cooking, baking, whatever, you can be attended to. There's a clinic on the premises. There's a social worker that will listen to your issues. You might be going through stuff at home and you're uncomfortable to say at home, I actually need to talk to somebody about my mental health. But when they come to our premises, they get all those services. So we really try and be inclusive and provide the services where we say it's a safe space, that when you're there, when you walk away, you are a bit comfortable. You've got everything that a young person needs. Now, one of the things that I find in our country, and I think mainly in Africa and in Asian countries, I could be wrong, is the adolescent girls and young women aged to the 15 to 25-year-olds. They call it the no age. It's like we don't even bother to talk to adults. We don't engage with adults. We're going to talk to our own friends and make our own decisions because nobody listens to us. It's like everything I ask or say, everybody says no. People assume that everybody has to go to school. Everybody must be academic. They must have nobody wants to hear their side. What do I have? What am I good at? I could be good in sports, horse riding, polo, whatever you want to name it. But because society says success is you going to university and having a doctorate, and we have a Dr. Mary in the family, that's what you're supposed to comply with. So we really try and accommodate all of that and say to young people, be who you are, what you want to be. We're here to support and encourage you. Of course, we have engagements with the communities, because now we call adults and say, let us talk about these young people. And that's why when they leave home, you never see them again. They leave home and it's like, yay, freedom. Nobody is going to tell me yeah or nay. I'm going to live my life the way I want. The last point I want to mention is young people that go somewhere in the world to volunteer in a structured, funded project. We struggle, and maybe that's where some people in this webinar can assist. We struggle with reintegrating them back in the community. Because when they come back, they spend a year abroad, they are completely different at a different level. And coming back, having to be integrated back, yeah, we say we've got these things for the alumni to do, but it's not structured, it doesn't last long. And before they know it, the alumni is bored. The organizations that send them do not have a means and ways to reintegrate the alumni back in the organization so that they can give back, and even in the communities. I mean, some struggle to get back even in their own families. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Mary. I mean, again, really, really important points. And I think your last point, I think it relates to one of the questions in the Q&A actually, because one of the questions here is whether volunteering could lead to well-being, whether volunteering as contributor to well-being could lead to sustained engagement. And you just talked about the importance of integrating the alumni or some of the older populations back to some of the work that you're doing. So I think it's a very real challenge. And I think at the heart of that is really recognizing what do they want, right? What the young people want. And I think part of the challenge here is society sort of determining what young people should be. And I think this relates to what Mike was saying. Oh, you should be good with AI. You should have these types of, certificates and whatever. There's very little now around what the young people want, right? What do they want, and what do they want to do with their own lives? So thanks for highlighting that. I'll now move over to Rahim. Rahim, you have a big job because I have a prepared question for you, and there's a question in the audience that I think will be you could sort of respond to. So you work with VSO, we know that, and it works at an international scale, yet VSO has been really, including the work that you're doing with the global standards, you're proposing local solutions that are relevant to the communities where you work. So 2 questions. First, I want to learn more about the best practices. What sort of best practices can organizations put in place to engage young people and support well-being? And there's a question here from Cliff in the Q&A that you might also want to respond to. So Cliff talks about motivations for volunteering. And this is, of course, varied, right? From his experience of international youth programs, one source of motivation is experiential, right? You want to experience something, travel and everything. So, which may involve risks, right? And the appetite for risk may be greater than the institutions that support such volunteering programs. So the question is well-being better served by limiting or encouraging that desire for experiential learning? And if a program is youth-led, what happens then to the duty of care? So big questions. Good luck, Rahim.
Thank you. And I've got the additional challenge representing VSO, our programs, our approach, the forum, International Forum for Volunteering and Development, their work on the global standard, and then also my own sort of work with UK-based youth-based organisations across the UK. Sorry, so triple focus. So hopefully I can bring quite a few to this discussion. I think in terms of good practices, I've made sort of for me personally, I think there's 3 points that are really important, and Mary alluded to one of them just now. Actually, is that transition. I realised through working across many organisations internationally, nationally, that you have funding for a program for young people, and we all know through VSO has this relational model, when those relationships with community is getting active, really does help with well-being, doing something that actually creates a lot of good and positivity. And programs are generally funded okay, but the bit after the next steps, when young people exit a youth volunteering program, there's very little finance available, capacity available to really help them to transition that experience into sort of their lives and move forward, not sort of get caught in the loop of volunteering. And that, I think there's a massive gap there in that transition stuff. When young people do a volunteering project, whether it's nationally or internationally, they go through a huge amount of change in personally, and they need to contextualize that and know how to sort of articulate that and use that for the way forward. So I think those pathways forward is a gap, is something that we need to invest in and we need to take as seriously as the volunteering itself. The other thing is around inclusion, and the Global Volunteering Standard really looks at sort of underrepresented groups. Now, we know from even the UK work I'm doing, a lot of young people that are from lower socioeconomic backgrounds who can benefit the most from volunteering in terms of skills and their well-being can't access volunteering. They have other priorities. They have to work, they have to bring in money, they have to support themselves. So it can become an elitist sort of opportunity, and we need to really think about how we sort of be more inclusive and make volunteering more accessible for underrepresented groups and lower socioeconomic groups. And by underrepresented, you can sort of assess what that means in your organization, whether it's people from the LGBTQAI+ community or disabilities, or that's personal to an organization. Think about who's underrepresented and what can you do to create access and and include them in sort of a activity that we all agree that is beneficial. The other thing is, I think the experiential learning, and a lot of organizations that I've worked with have initially been quite risk averse to working with your unusual suspects as volunteers. And I think if you look at it from a systems and processes approach and training up your people, I put in quite a few new processes when I worked with Rally International, who did a youth volunteering program, and one of it was looking at young people from I think if we look at equity, for example, right, having people that may struggle to access volunteering, have high support needs, is really look at them on an individual basis and provide them that extra level of support training, but also understanding their needs. So we created a needs-based assessment, which every young person went through, and we helped to identify an individual's specific needs, and that helped to make sure our staff were aware of those needs and how to react to those needs, which are very individual and unique per young person. And that carried on to the support that we sort of gave to them on national projects and in-country projects as well. So there's sort of three areas. Now, for me, there's so much to talk about, so I just sort of picked these three things. So it's that, your processes, your support needs, how you identify support and how to provide that support, how we look at making volunteering inclusive and accessible, and how we do that transitioning thing. So making sure that what happens after volunteering is as important as what we're doing in terms of providing the opportunity and support when they are volunteering.
Yeah. And I think you highlight a very important challenge to many organizations, which is how do you become less risk averse when it comes to involving young people, especially those below 18s in volunteering programs. Again, it's a difficult question, as you said, but there might be systems and sort of support in place, just like the global volunteering standards, which could be a basis for discussion in that area. So thanks, Rahim. I'll now move over to Mike. So Mike, one of the things we found in this report is that youth well-being should be everyone's concern and not only young people's, right? So how can volunteer involving organizations, you are coming here as a young person, you've done a lot of work in Hong Kong. So I wanted to get your ideas around, what can volunteer involving organizations, some of them are in the chat, in the audience. How about governments and other institutions? How can they build on existing youth-led solutions, such as initiatives in your organizations, to well-being, to enhance the impact? So how can organizations better support youth-led solutions, really?
Thanks, Chris. So in our organization, we do have a lot of the youth-led solutions or youth-led projects we're running on it. But the most important thing is like we know youth, they need some opportunity to show off their talent and to do something that they want. So we need to provide a platform for the youth to do something wrong, actually. And another thing we wanted to let the youth know is that not only please don't just focus on the volunteering. Sometimes you need to living in the earth, so you need to learn from the others as well. but we don't want to make any tagging on the youth, because like we don't want the youth to treat them as I'm underprivileged and I'm from a lower income family. We don't want to do something. So in our organization, what we are doing is like we will provide a platform for youth to do a lot of the youth-led initiative or some projects. But apart from that, we will partner with some corporates. For example, Ernst & Young, we do have a lot of partnership with those corporates. And we didn't ask those corporates to provide a mentor and the youth as a mentee. We don't do it all that way. We do it another way, is like the youth is the mentor and those corporates employee as a mentee. Because like those mentees, they just focus on earning money. They don't have any idea about the volunteering. So we ask the youth as a mentor to teach those employees how to become a good volunteer, how to become a good volunteer leaders, and how to make sure they can share some their volunteer experience. During this sharing, during this idea exchange, those corporate employees, they will have share some of their life experience with those youth, and those youth will, and then they will turn like, okay, I know what I need to do for my coming life for the next 10 years or next 20 years, and what's the target for my life. And we're doing something like this, and we don't want to make some tagging on the youth. You are underprivileged or what. We're trying to let the youth become a master, a monster, and handle everything. Everybody's learn from them. Yeah, this is how we are doing and trying to let the youth to take the lead initiative. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's, I mean, it's really looking at intergenerational learning and kind of switching that in his head. Because often we always just think of young people as the one that needs to be trained, they need to be, some of these are very tokenistic even and condescending. But then also young people have a lot of talents and skills and knowledge, right? And doing things. So we should also sort of build on that, which was an excellent example, Mike. I think that's
what you have is creativity. Yeah. So
yeah. And the energy to, I guess, no? Yeah, great. So we don't have a lot of time. We have sort of 9 minutes before we end this webinar. So I thought there are a number of questions here that, I would just give to you if you'd like to respond. One of the questions here is about how to reconcile the expectations of young people and their realities to avoid burnouts when they are participating in volunteering programs. So I wondered whether maybe George and Mike, as young youth volunteers, how do you balance your time to, make sure that you don't burn out? Yeah, George, did you want to take on that one?
2 points come to mind straight away, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier. But burnout is a huge issue, and across the board, and I think what I'm increasingly seeing in the UK context is kind of very formulaic, routine ways of engaging and tokenistic ways of engaging with young people, and kind of very structurally kind of mechanistic ways of inefficiently and kind of light touch engagement with young people. So time needs to be taken and resource needs to be allocated to ensure that actually in depth we are addressing the problems and the challenges that are in the round affecting young people, and to provide them with an intervention that is different, a kind of different method, a kind of because more of the same kind of Monday to Friday monotony is not going to engage them. Is not going to engage young people, and kind of the inefficiencies of our society, I think, are what kind of, and young people's awareness of the inefficiencies of our society kind of is what may indeed be psychologically burning out young people, because they want something different, and they want to be a part something that's different. Second, kind of an interrelated point to that. Young people are everybody's business, but not in a corporate sense. Forgive me, but to look after our future is everybody's concern, and it should be everybody's priority. It takes a village to raise a child, and so is volunteering. You know, I work on policy and public affairs for Volunteering Matters. I can't write about volunteering on my own. I can't affect the change that I want to see for young people and for the work we do on my own. So a place-based approach, an end to siloed working, kind of less competition, more collaboration, and more of the values that were underpinned by England's vision for volunteering launched last year. That is what is going to be needed, because actually it's not about individual roles. It's about the future that we want to see. And I think if we coordinate and communicate that we want a better future and more values-driven future for young people, you'll see that they wake up and engage. They don't want to engage with a tone and a structure that they've had enough of. So we've got to demonstrate the structures and our systems are willing to engage and meet them where they are. And there has to be a challenge. There has to be a challenge to our wider sector. You know, who is in the room, but who also isn't in the room, and how can we, how can we ensure that in changing our society, in actually addressing the inequalities in our society, we are prioritizing engagement with those that most need healing and engagement first.
Yeah, great. Thanks, George. I think that's a really good, really powerful statement. And I think, that's a really good closing point from you. And I'd like to just, before we close, just give the other panelists, sorry, we don't have time for any more questions, but I'd like to give the other panelists to have sort of their final words, perhaps, like very quick final words or insight on the topic before we close. Shall we start with you, Rahim, and then we move on to Mike and then to Mary?
Yeah, sure. Okay, there's so much to say in a very little time. I think what I'm going to stick to is something practical, because I think we're all on the same page. In terms of there's the free resource I talked about, which is the Global Volunteering Standard. Please do connect. I'll send some details on the chat on how to access that. We also, there's an annual conference or forum coming up, which I know a colleague of mine on the call, Milan Stephen, had mentioned. So IFCO 2023 is about a new generation of volunteers as change makers. It's focused on youth. It's hosted by an organization called YSS, and it'll be in Kuala Lumpur, in Malaysia, in October. It really aims to invigorate our commitment to keep the new generation of volunteers at the heart of our work. So really looking at things around youth-led, around well-being, a wide range of topics, and it really is there to really encourage open conversations, have a forum to share good practice, and create opportunities for delegates to network and exchange ideas and partner up, so we can actually maximize the work we're doing for the benefit of youth. So I'll put all of that in the chat, and I know we're very late for time, so I'm not going to take any more time out. I'll also put my personal contact details if anyone would like to connect with me. Thank you, Chris, for having me, and thank you, IAVE and Wendy, for the great opportunity. Thanks,
Rahim. Lovely to engage with you. Mike?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, just a quick echo back to the question about the burnout part. So I think in our organization, for a group of volunteers, we not just treat them as a volunteer. We hope they will treat them as a friends. So apart from the volunteer work they are doing, regularly, we are trying to do a lot of some reunion or like some team building event to make sure that they will not just treat each other as the volunteer, but they will treat each other as a sister and brothers. So this is what we do. So when they have a strong connection between each other, so they will not think doing volunteer will make them feel disorder or feel tired. They will really self-motivate, honestly. Yeah, just some minor tricks. Yeah.
Thank you, Mike. That's great, and lovely to see you and to listen from your experience as well. And Mary, would you like to close us off now?
Yeah, just one thing from me. There's a song by a hip-hop artist called NAS, N-A-S, and the song says, "I can." So let us allow young people to be. Thank you.
I love that. Yeah, thank you, Mary. And again, thank you very much to, oh, George, do you want to have a final word? Sorry, I didn't give you your final 30-second. If you have any other final thoughts.
my final thought is to everybody that if you are doing something to make a young person's day better, more joyful, and you are alongside a young person in doing that, thank you, because you're doing my job for me. And hopefully whenever I go out and listen to young people and you know, it's that simple. It's about treating everybody with equality and treating everybody with care, and understanding that relationally volunteering in its power has the ability to truly recognize people for their own assets and skills. So yeah. So thank you for being here and demonstrating that you care about this topic, and that in our work we want to listen to young people. There's nothing more important than that.
Yeah, great, George. I mean, that's a really good point to end on. So again, thank you very much to all our panelists, Raheem, Mary, Mike, and George. I'd also like to thank Wendy Osborne, who probably everybody knows, who really kind of brought us together. Thank you very much. Brought this excellent panel together. And of course, to Gal Potashnik from IAVE. Thank you so much, Gal. You just really brought this thing together. So we don't, on the tech side, thank you very much for that. And just to say that, Wendy, do you want me to just read through these? There's going to be a, or do you want to? Yeah, okay. So we have, there are 3 more on the youth volunteering series hosted by IAVE. So hopefully you'll join us then. So the next one is on youth volunteering, evidence into action, learning from research with Volunteer Scotland. That's going to be on the 12th of July. And then we have youth volunteering and youth activism, which is again part of this series, which is exploring how volunteering empowers and builds leadership to affect change. What's the link between volunteering and activism? On September 12th and on October 3rd, we have youth volunteering and social change, which is really bringing together the insights that we've talked about or that were generated because of this series. So again, thank you very much, everybody. And I hope that you have a good rest of your day. And thank you again to our panelists for such a lovely conversation. Thank you. Bye for now.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
I